SimCity 2000. Is it the perfect computer game? Maybe not, but it's been my favorite for well over 30 years. I got to thinking, what would my ideal setup for playing it look like? Then I realized I already have it. So let's put it together. First up is the monitor. I try not to collect CRTs due to the space they take up, but when this 16-inch Apple display crossed my path, I couldn't say no. It's in decent shape, just a bit of yellowing like one would expect, and a couple signs of its age. Plastic tends to shrink over time, and it looks like that, plus the weight of the CRT, has caused a couple small cracks to form in the bezel. It's something I'll need to keep an eye on, but can't do a whole lot about due to how the monitor is designed. When it launched in 1991, nobody thought this thing would still be in use several decades later. But it was a compelling option back when it was new, as it sports a Trinitron tube with a fixed resolution of 832 by 624. That's a bit oddball by today's standards, but pushing that many pixels back then was an expensive proposition, both in terms of computational power and cost. It routinely sold for about $1,500 US. And the perfect period-accurate machine to drive it is one we've seen before. Yep, it's my Quadra 700, which debuted in late 1991 as well. These are a favorite among vintage Mac enthusiasts, and I'm very happy to have one in my collection. I did a deep dive into this machine in a previous episode, so be sure to check that one out. But in short, it's one of the first Macs to use the Motorola 68040 processor, in this case clocked at 25 MHz. The machine also has a Blue SCSI in place of its original hard drive and a total of 20 megabytes of RAM. This thing was quite powerful in its day and overkill for SimCity 2000, but I'm not going to complain. That doesn't mean I can't improve things further, though. Its built-in video is capable of driving this display, but it's limited to 256 colors without a video RAM upgrade, which I don't have any spares of. But I think I can do better by adding in a new bus video card, which should include some hardware acceleration to make screen redraws quicker. I've had this one sitting around for a while, a direct color 824 from Radius. It came from a time when larger monitors and higher bit depths, useful for desktop publishing, were cutting edge. Accordingly, it had a crazy price tag of $3,600, though its competition wasn't much cheaper. This headline, then, shouldn't be surprising. But what was surprising to me is that, well, this card didn't work. I've used it in the past on other displays without problems, but all I got this time was green noise on the monitor. It felt to me like the card was outputting a signal the display couldn't handle, but there was one other thing I could try first. I plugged the monitor back into the onboard video and installed the card's drivers. I wasn't convinced this would help, but it was worth a shot. And nope, still no good. This is happening even before the OS begins to boot, so it's definitely a hardware thing. That's a bummer, but maybe this card would make for a good upgrade in another one of my Macs. Radius was a big name at the time, having been started by members of the original Mac development team in 1986. But the company struggled in the mid-90s without a clear market direction. By the end of the decade, it had focused on video editing and changed its name to Digital Origin, ultimately being acquired by Media 100 in 2002. I had hope then that the other card I had would work better. It's a more recent acquisition, a RasterOps Colorboard 24MX from 1992. They were another prolific Mac graphics company dealing not just with desktop publishing, but also the early days of computer-based video editing. This card, though, was a bit of an unknown in terms of its functionality. I did find and fix a factory bodge, a resistor tied between two pins on a chip, and hoped that would be the extent of the repair work. I removed the Radius drivers and installed the RasterOps ones instead, then dropped the card in and gave it a shot. The gradient was a good sign, as was the gray background it switched to. But then... what the hell? It showed only the leftmost edge of the image repeated across the screen. I could move the pointer around and it looked like it was displaying at the correct resolution. Ultimately, I figured out this was another compatibility problem. Not with the monitor though, but with the computer itself. I managed to find an article about the card. It says the 24MX will indeed output 832 by 624, but also specifically said it was for the Mac II series. It turns out there was another version of the card, the 24MXQ, meant for use in Quadras. And this implies the card I have simply won't work. That's a bummer because I even managed to dig out some compatible 80 nanosecond RAM sims to upgrade it with. I think I do have a candidate for this card though, but that'll have to wait for another time. RasterOps still exists today in a roundabout way. It started out in 1987 by launching the first Mac video card that could output millions of colors. In 1992, it acquired TrueVision, taking on its name and focusing on digital video editing. Competitor Pinnacle Systems bought TrueVision in 1999, then Pinnacle itself was acquired by Avid in 2005. But Avid didn't want to deal with the consumer products Pinnacle sold, so that portion was sold off to Corel in 2012. So if you've ever heard of the Pinnacle Studio software suite, now you know where the name comes from. But anyway, graphics are only one part of the SimCity 2000 experience. Part of the reason why I like playing it on the Mac specifically is because of its music and how the platform renders it. It's a real nostalgia hit. The Quadra 700 has a built-in speaker, but I could definitely do better. At first I thought about using my Apple-designed powered speakers, which are compact and sound decent enough. But they aren't period accurate, having been introduced in 1993 when Apple was changing from its Snow White design language to a new one called Espresso. I needed something a bit more angular and boxy to match the Quadra. So I pulled out a set of Bose Roommates, speakers that are far less common. They're self-powered and beige just like the rest of the setup. But what makes them special is this. A curious rainbow logo on their grills. It's actually kind of a wild story. The Roommate series dates back to 1984, where they were marketed as portable speakers for general music playback. They're really just Model 101 speakers with a built-in amplifier, but as the sound capabilities of computers improved through the 80s, Bose began to market them as a multimedia accessory. Shortly after the launch of the Apple IIgs in 1986, Apple helped market them, and that's where things get interesting. In 1978, Apple got itself into hot water with Apple Corps, a company founded by British pop group The Beatles. Apple Computer was served with a lawsuit claiming trademark infringement, and after a few years of negotiation, a settlement was made where Apple Corps was paid $80,000 and Apple Computer agreed not to get involved in the music business. Well, the letters GS in 2GS stood for graphics and sound, two standout features of the new machine. And with MIDI support and audio recording capabilities, this got Apple Corps' attention. Bose, meanwhile, had co-branded the Roommate speakers, including Apple Computer's logo right next to its own. But as things started to get spicy between the two Apples again, Bose began to distance itself from the situation by simplifying the logo down to a square that just so happened to have a familiar-looking rainbow. In 1989, Apple Corps had enough and filed another lawsuit with Apple Computer, and Bose noped out of the situation by dropping the co-branding altogether. It didn't want to get dragged into that fight. It's commonly believed that these special edition Roommates were only sold as accessories for the 2GS, but that's not the case, as there are ads from the same time period showing them alongside the Mac as well. And this wasn't even the first time Bose had co-branded a product, which was pretty rare for them. There were a set of Roommates meant to pair with Sony's first portable CD player. Why Sony of all companies needed Bose to make speakers for them is a topic of its own, but it is interesting to see how the company, with its own strong branding standards, didn't allow its actual word mark to appear next to Bose's. There was actually another set of Roommate speakers from the 80s as well, a version marketed towards video use. These had a front-mounted volume dial and featured magnetic shielding, so they wouldn't interfere with a CRT they were placed next to. Why these weren't the ones that were co-branded with Apple is a good question, but all versions of these speakers did offer these ridiculous desk clamp mounts. So, of course, I'm going to use them. Back to Apple. As the two sides battled in court, the computer company yet again managed to negotiate a settlement with the Beatles in 1991. The London Evening Standard revealed the payment as being £7 million, but the San Francisco Chronicle claimed it was $29 million US. Those numbers don't match up for the time, but either way, it set Apple Computer up with a license for the Apple trademark. While all this was going on, Apple was working on developing its System 7 operating system with a host of new features. This included new system alert sounds, and developer Jim Reeks came up with one that poked fun at the situation.
Then I make the sound, and I called it chime. So the internal lawyers at Apple freaked out. They thought the word chime was something too musical. And it's like, are you kidding me? Like, come on. And I was like, I got to come up with a new name for this. And I said, I know. Just off the top of my head, I said, I know. I want to call it Let It Beep. Because it seemed to summarize everything. But I'm like, there's no way. Like, if they're going to sue me over the word chime, there's no way they're going to let me use that. As soon as I said that, they said, no way, you can't do that. And I'm like, I was kidding. But like, as they're arguing that I can't actually use the name Let It Beep, I said, just off the top of my head, I said again, so sue me. And then as soon as I said it, I'm like, holy shit, that's the name. I just have to spell it funny so that no one realizes what I'm doing. So I was like, it kind of sounds like a Japanese word. Maybe if I spell it like it's a Japanese word, that it'll get past the lawyers. I told I can't remember if her title was director or whatever, but the most important person in the room, I said, would you write the email to the lawyers letting them know that we changed the word from chime to this Japanese word, and it doesn't mean anything musical. And I said, but don't say it to them. No. Just spell it. Send it as an email. Just spell it, because if you say it, they might get it. In the back of my mind, I think they actually did get it, but I think that they were willing to let it go. A couple of years later, in a branding, patent, IP, lawyers, industry magazine that I had never heard of because I don't practice law, I had found a little sidebar that had mentioned this story. So apparently, the lawyers had actually figured it out. But it went in and it shipped on System 7, and it remains there to this day.
Right.
Reeks, incidentally, was also the guy who came up with the now iconic Mac startup chime, which plays on new machines to this day. But that wasn't even the end of it. In 2003, Apple Corp sued Apple Computer yet again, this time over the launch of the iTunes Music Store. After duking it out in an English court, in 2006 the judge ruled that Apple Computer had not, in fact, violated the terms of its 1991 settlement. The BBC had brought in journalist Guy Cuny for commentary during a newscast, but in an infamous case of mistaken identity, Guy Goma, who was at BBC headquarters for a job interview, ended up on the show instead and found himself just winging it.
And the growth of music online. Well, Guy Cuny is the editor of the technology website News Wireless. Hello, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Were you surprised by this verdict today?
I'm very surprised to see this verdict to come on me, because I was not expecting that. When I came, they told me something else, and I'm coming. You got an interview there, so it's a big surprise anyway.
The Beatles vowed to appeal the court's decision, but Apple ended up buying all of their trademark rights in 2007 for about $500 million and licensing them back to Apple Corp. And with that behind them, Apple Computer changed its name to just Apple Incorporated to reflect its expansion into more than just computers.
And from this day forward, we're going to be known as Apple Incorporated to reflect the product mix that we have today. What
were we talking about again? Oh yeah, SimCity 2000. Video card shenanigans aside, this setup is great. While few people complained about 640 by 480 resolution in the early 90s, having the extra real estate with this monitor makes the game just that much more immersive. Is this all completely pointless? Absolutely. But that's what makes it fun. If you liked the video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Here's another episode you should check out, and as always, thanks for watching.